A day of triumph turned to tragedy in an instant. The Ark of the Covenant, the symbol of God's presence and power, was being transported with joy and celebration. But then it happened. The oxen stumbled, the ark swayed, and Uzzah stretched out his hand to steady it. In that fleeting moment, he was struck dead by God himself. Why? Was this justice or divine overreaction? How could a God of love and mercy deliver such a severe judgment on a man seemingly acting out of good intentions? Stay with me to the end of this story and you'll discover will amaze you. This is not just Uzzah's story. It's a profound theological challenge for every believer. It confronts us with uncomfortable truths about the holiness of God, the seriousness of His commands, and the weight of human presumption. Are we truly prepared to approach the sacred, or have we, like Uzzah, underestimated the cost of irreverence? Today, we unravel the mystery of his strange and tragic death. To understand the death of Uzzah, we must first grasp the profound significance of the Ark of the Covenant. This was not merely a gold-plated chest or a relic of ancient religion. It was the very throne of God on earth, a tangible sign of His presence among the people of Israel. Crafted according to divine specifications given to Moses, every detail of the Ark spoke of holiness, glory, and the unmatched majesty of the Creator. Inside it lay the tablets of the Ten Commandments, the law etched by God's own hand. Alongside them rested Aaron's budding staff and a jar of manna, symbols of God's provision, authority, and faithfulness. On top, the mercy seat, flanked by golden cherubim, signified His grace and the place where atonement was made. To approach the ark carelessly was to disregard not just an object, but the very presence of the Almighty. Now imagine the scene. King David, a man after God's own heart, desired to bring this sacred artifact back to Jerusalem, the city chosen to be the center of Israel's worship. It was a moment of national pride, a declaration that God was their king and protector. The entire nation rejoiced as the ark was placed on a cart drawn by oxen, a choice that would prove disastrous. For the law of Moses had been explicit. The ark was to be carried by the Levites on poles, never touched, never handled casually. It was a command that emphasized the infinite chasm between divine holiness and human sin. But why Uzzah? Who was this man whose fate would etch itself so deeply into the narrative of Israel? Uzzah, alongside his brother Ahio, was the son of Abinadab, the man who had safeguarded the ark for decades. To Uzzah, it was familiar, a piece of his everyday life, and therein lies the tragedy. Familiarity bred presumption, and presumption in the face of God's holiness can be fatal. David's intentions were noble, the people's joy was genuine, but something vital had been forgotten. The holiness of God is not to be trifled with. It was a lesson Israel would learn at a terrible cost. And as we reflect on this, we must ask ourselves, have we too grown casual with the sacred? Have we lost the reverence that God's presence demands? This is not just a story of ancient Israel, it is a mirror for our own lives. How do we approach God in our worship, our service, and our daily lives? Are we guilty of treating the sacred as ordinary? Let Uzzah's story awaken us to the seriousness of God's holiness. Take a moment today to examine your heart. Commit to rediscovering the awe and reverence that God deserves. Share your reflections in the comments below. How has this story challenged you? The air was thick with celebration as the Ark of the Covenant, the very symbol of God's presence, was transported on a new cart. The people sang with jubilant hearts, tambourines rang out, and David himself danced with unrestrained joy. Yet amidst this euphoria, a quiet deviation was overlooked, a subtle yet profound departure from God's explicit instructions. The Ark, a sacred object meant to be carried by consecrated priests using poles, now rested precariously on a cart, pulled by oxen. It was a method borrowed from the Philistines, a practical solution perhaps, but one that ignored the weight of divine command. And there, walking alongside the cart, was Uzzah, a man familiar with the ark, having grown up in its proximity. To him, it was not a distant mystery, but a tangible presence in his home. As the procession continued, the oxen stumbled. In an instant, the unthinkable happened. The ark shifted, tilting as if to fall. Without hesitation, Uzzah reached out, his hand steadying the sacred vessel. It was an instinctive act, a reflex born of concern. But in that split second, something far greater than human logic was revealed. A flash of divine power struck him down where he stood. The joyous music ceased. Gasps of horror rippled through the crowd as Uzzah fell lifeless. The celebration turned to silence, and all eyes turned to the ark, now still, but no less fearsome. Why did this happen? Why would a God of love and mercy respond so severely to what seemed like an act of devotion? Was it an overreaction? Or was there an immutable truth at play? A truth about the nature of God and the sacred boundaries that must never be crossed? This moment forces us to confront a question. Do we truly understand the God we worship? Are we too quick to act without considering the gravity of His holiness? Join me as we unravel the layers of this incident and discover the profound lessons it holds for us today. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share your thoughts in the comments section. It helps us to share this biblical insight to more people. This moment in history is not merely about a tragic misstep, but a theological turning point that demands reflection. To fully grasp its significance, we must step back and examine the divine framework surrounding the Ark of the Covenant. From its inception, the Ark was no ordinary object. It was crafted according to precise instructions, adorned with gold, and crowned with the mercy seat, a place where God's presence dwelled in unapproachable light. It was holy, set apart, untouchable, except by those appointed and consecrated for the task. In the wilderness, the Levites bore the ark on their shoulders, using poles specifically designed for this purpose. They did so with an awareness of its sanctity, knowing that even a glance at the sacred would invite divine wrath. The instructions given in Numbers 4:15 were unequivocal. No hand was to touch the ark, for doing so would bring death. These commands were not arbitrary. They were a vivid reminder of God's transcendence and humanity's frailty. Fast forward to this fateful day, and we see a stark departure from these sacred protocols. The ark, instead of being carried with reverence, was placed on a cart, a method first employed by the Philistines, pagans who did not understand or respect the covenantal significance of the ark. What does this tell us? It reveals a subtle yet profound erosion of reverence. The Israelites, in their enthusiasm, prioritized convenience over obedience. The sacred became common, and in that casualness, a line was crossed. Now consider Uzzah. He was not a stranger to the ark. It had been in his household for years. Perhaps its constant presence dulled his sense of its sacredness. When the ark shifted, his instinct was to protect it. But herein lies the crux of the matter. Uzzah assumed that his hand was cleaner than the ground. He presumed that his actions could preserve what was divine, overlooking the fact that God does not need human intervention to safeguard His glory. Uzzah's death was not a reaction to his intentions, but a revelation of a deeper reality. God's holiness is absolute. It cannot be negotiated, diluted, or approached on human terms. The incident was a reminder that reverence is not optional, and obedience is not a suggestion. Divine holiness does not bend to human convenience or zeal. This story also confronts us with an uncomfortable truth: the tendency to approach God with presumption rather than awe. How often do we prioritize our methods, our ideas, over His clear commands? How frequently do we treat the sacred with a casual familiarity that borders on contempt? The tragedy of Uzzah calls us to pause and reflect. Do we truly comprehend the God we claim to worship? And so, This incident asks us hard questions. How do we balance zeal with submission? How do we ensure that our worship reflects both passion and precision? As we delve further, let us explore what this ancient event means for us today, in a world that increasingly forgets the standards of a holy God. Take a moment to subscribe to this channel so as to spread this fascinating tales of the Holy Book. The story of Uzzah is not just a cautionary tale from an ancient past, it is a mirror reflecting our own approach to worship today. We live in an era where the sacred is often treated as ordinary, where the weight of God's holiness is overshadowed by casualness and convenience. Uzzah's actions, though rooted in good intentions, serve as a stark reminder that zeal must never override reverence. Consider a modern worship service. How often do we see a lack of preparation, a tendency to rush into God's presence without thought or reflection? Do we truly understand the gravity of standing before a holy God, or have we reduced worship to a routine devoid of awe? Uzzah's story challenges us to examine our hearts and attitudes. Are we more concerned with our comfort than with God's standards? But this reflection goes beyond worship practices. It speaks to our daily lives as well. When we make decisions, do we seek God's guidance, or do we act out of instinct, assuming that our intentions are enough? Uzzah's story reminds us that good intentions, while commendable, are no substitute for obedience. Reverence begins with aligning our actions with God's will, not assuming we can bend His holiness to fit our desires. This is a call to rediscover a profound truth. God's holiness is not a barrier meant to keep us away, but an invitation to approach Him rightly. The tension between His majesty and His mercy should drive us to worship with humility and gratitude, not with presumption. As we reflect on this, consider your own approach to the sacred. How do you prepare your heart for worship? How do you honor God in your daily life? These are not trivial questions. They are the essence of a faith that seeks to honor the one who is both holy and near. If this resonates with you, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to explore more thought-provoking stories from Scripture, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Together, let us pursue a deeper understanding of God's holiness and grace. As we close, the story of Uzzah leaves us with profound lessons, ones that demand more than a passing thought. It calls us to examine how we live, worship, and approach the holy God who invites us into His presence. First, God's holiness demands reverence. It is not a concept to be trivialized or forgotten. The Ark of the Covenant symbolized His presence, and to approach it casually was to misunderstand the weight of His glory. Today, we may not have an ark, but the presence of God is no less real. How do we honor that reality in our daily lives? Second, obedience is greater than intentions. Uzzah's act was born from instinct, but even well-meaning actions must align with God's commands. This challenges us to look beyond good intentions and ask whether we are truly walking in step with God's will. Do our lives reflect obedience, or have we allowed convenience to shape our choices? Third, worship must balance reverence with grace. God's holiness and His mercy are not opposites, but harmonies that call us to a deeper, richer faith. We should approach Him with humility, recognizing His majesty while embracing the grace that welcomes us into His presence. These lessons are not merely theological ideas. They are a call to transformation. They invite us to realign our hearts and minds, to see worship not as an act of routine, but as an offering of deep reverence and joy. What about you? How has Uzzah's story challenged your understanding of worship and obedience? Take a moment to reflect. And if this message resonates with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Let's engage in a dialogue that inspires and encourages one another. For more stories and lessons that explore the depth of God's Word, be sure to subscribe to this channel. Join us on this journey of discovering God's holiness and grace, one story at a time. Until next time, may your worship be marked by reverence, your life by obedience, and your heart by his transforming grace.